Good Will Hunting, a very beautiful movie with one of the best screenplays that I've ever seen. I truly appreciate the work that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck put into the script. In this video, I want to share that appreciation by showing the life and growth of Will Hunting with three pillars. Now, what do I mean by pillars? I just mean the certain areas of Will Hunting's life that are important for him. The three pillars I identified for him are family and friends, work, and love. In addition, I've assigned a character to each pillar that represents a relationship in that movie that furthers the pillar. So for family and friends, it's Chucky, for love, it's Skylar, and for work, it's Dr. Gerald Lambo. Now let me explain more on each pillar and what they exactly mean for Will Hunting. First is family and friends. Chucky is Will's best friend, someone who has been there throughout his entire life. However, Will does not have a family. He is an orphan and went through many foster homes, getting a lot of physical abuse from his foster parents. Despite this, I still include family in this pillar because Chucky is basically a brother for Will. Next is love. Skylar is someone that Will meets at a bar. Will is setting up for Chucky when a posh Harvard guy comes and tries to pick up some women, but he's actually just regurgitating information to do so and is not coming up with original ideas. At least this is what Will brings to the table. This really impresses Skylar and is enough for Will to get her number. He calls the number and they go out on a date. They seem to have a great time on the stage, showing that this relationship could go further. Finally is work. Dr. Lambo puts a problem on the board for his MIT students to solve. However, none of them end up solving it. It's actually Will Hunting, who is a janitor working at MIT. One night, Dr. Lambo sees Will working on the board and tells him to go away because he thinks he's doing graffiti. However, Dr. Lambo soon realizes that Will is actually the mathematical genius who is able to solve these problems. Dr. Lambo goes to court to meet Will, where he is currently being tried for a crime. He learns about all of the other crimes that he committed as well, and Dr. Lambo realizes that Will is in a bad position even though he has an exceptional mind. He wants to get Will out of that position, but on two conditions. First, he must meet with Dr. Lambo every week to further his mathematical abilities, and second, he must go to therapy, which brings me to my next point. Dr. Lambo tries to set up Will with critically acclaimed therapists. However, none of these work on Will because he's able to use his academic wit to rip apart their methods. He uses this as a defense mechanism to not talk about his feelings, which ends up embarrassing the therapist and get them to stop working with him. However, there is a therapist that is willing to take on the challenge. Dr. Sean McGuire. In the beginning, Will believes he has Dr. McGuire read like a book. Will sees a painting in the distance and assumes that Dr. McGuire made the painting because he chose the wrong wife. However, Dr. McGuire explains to Will that he chose the right wife because he had so many shared experiences with her that made life with her so beautiful. And this is something also that Dr. McGuire communicates to Will. Experience is very important for actually understanding what life feels like, and that you can't understand someone just by reading a book. So if Dr. McGuire wants to know more about Will and actually help him solve his problems, Will has to tell Dr. McGuire about his life because he can't learn that simply from reading a book. This is good therapy being demonstrated here. This is why Dr. McGuire is such an effective therapist. Now that we've established Dr. McGuire as a worthy therapist, how does he exactly help Will address each of his three pillars? We begin with the pillar that Will is willing to talk about. Love. Will has yet to call Skylar again because he is afraid he'll ruin the perfect image of her. He tells Dr. McGuire about this, who responds by telling Will about the imperfections of his wife. Even with these imperfections, Dr. McGuire still loved his wife. In fact, it's these imperfections that made Dr. McGuire love his wife even more. Dr. McGuire tells Will it's more about whether or not Will and Skylar are perfect for each other. That's what actually matters. So with this newfound thinking, he goes and calls Skylar for another date where they go to a dog race. Despite this thinking though, he still is not willing to share the truth with Skylar that he's an orphan and instead tells Skylar that he has 12 big brothers. However, this light comes to fruition when Skylar tells Will to move to California with her. Will initially says that he just wants to stay in Boston where he has all of his life in order. However, this slowly spirals into his actual problem, which is that he's an orphan and that he got abused by so many foster families. This makes him think that he doesn't deserve love. And this is where that other pillar comes into play. Family and friends. Mainly that family part, right? Because Will has never had a family. He's never had someone give him that deep protective love most children get. And the fact that he doesn't have this makes him afraid that if he goes out there and does something that may or may not end in a breakup, then he'll have to feel emotionally vulnerable, which is something that he doesn't want to feel because he has no one to go to explain those feelings, at least for now, right? I mean, he has Dr. McGuire, but they haven't built that trust yet. This is still an issue for Will. This issue also impacts Will's third pillar, work. Dr. Lambo sets up Will with a bunch of job offers from top companies. Here, will be able to do the work he's always wanted to. However, Will pushes these job offers away because he feels that he would fail at them. Even a single mistake would ruin his life. That's at least what Will thinks because he's being pushed so hard. He would feel abandoned once again if he failed, which is something he doesn't want to feel. So this is how Will's issue actually impacts his pillars. This is what he should be telling Dr. McGuire. However, this is actually much more realistic for Will and actual people. They're not going to share everything in one go. Will actually wants to build trust with Dr. McGuire before sharing such revealing things that he's too scared to talk about. However, even though Will never explicitly shares this problem, Dr. McGuire is such a good therapist that he's able to connect the dots on his own and figure out a way to help Will. He also understands that Will needs to trust Dr. McGuire fully before actually talking about the really important stuff. And he does this by talking about Skylar with Will and also talking about his soulmate experience with his wife. These are very little things that ultimately go up to this big conversation that Will and Dr. McGuire have. After this though, there's actually a session where Will's problem gets addressed, even though it's not directly. Will talks about why he didn't take the NSA job. He says it's because he didn't want to hurt anybody. However, Dr. McGuire looks at this through another lens. He uses the concept of a soulmate, someone you can talk to and someone who challenges you to introduce this concept. He basically says that a soulmate is someone great to have, but if you think of all the negative things that can come from having one, then you're never going to try and see what it's like. And this is what's happening with Will. Will is not trying to go after these jobs, even though they could provide great benefits for him. It's an effect from the problem that he has, which will slowly come up to an actual fruition that we will see later on. Anyway, Dr. McGuire tries to use the concept of the soulmate that I described in order to guide Will in the right direction and get him to do what he actually wants. However, Will just says he wants to be a shepherd or do construction because he sees those jobs as honorable. He wouldn't regret doing those jobs. However, Dr. McGuire says that Will wanted to work at MIT. He could have been a janitor anywhere, but he chose to do it at MIT. That's saying something. That's basically telling Dr. McGuire that Will is not honorable to the most important person, himself. And this brings us to the fourth pillar, self-love. But wait, you said that Will only has 3 pillars. How can he have a 4th one? This is a pillar that Will had to build, and he built that with the help of Dr. McGuire. In fact, it's what Dr. McGuire was trying to get Will to do. No, it's what he figured out he had to do. That distinction is very important because it's from Will talking with Dr. McGuire and Dr. McGuire talking to Will and them having this interaction, this relationship that's built on so much trust that Dr. McGuire is able to figure out what Will truly needs, and that is self-love. He demonstrates this through the scene where he's telling Will that it's not his fault that he was abused by so many people in his life and that his parents abandoned him. Like, that's not his fault, and that he just needs to feel that comfort. He needs to feel that from an authority figure, someone who gives him that deep protection, that affection that he's been looking for his entire life. He needed someone to tell him that he is loved and that he should love himself as well. This also goes back to the point that Will looked at his life analytically. All Will did through his life was read books. He read so many books where he learned about all of these academia. And now that's all impressive and all, but he never really experienced life. He was too afraid to do that because when he did, he was getting abused by his parents, which is not what should be happening in that situation. Now, through the guidance, but more importantly, the affection he gets from Sean McGuire, Will understands what it means to live. He understands how to handle each of his 3 pillars. He now understands that he has to leave his friends and family if he wants to grow, as Chucky says himself.
It'd be an insult to us if you're still here in 20 years. Hanging around here is a fucking waste of your time.
He now understands that he has to go after Skylar, who is potentially the love of his life, even if it means them breaking up. He now understands that he has to challenge himself in his work and do the thing he actually wanted to do, which was pursue mathematics. He now understands that in order to live a happy life, he needs to love what he's doing and not have any regrets. And that, my friends, is Will Hunting. Alright, so that wraps up my analysis on Good Will Hunting. I hope you enjoyed seeing this movie in another light. Next week, I'll be going over Catch Me If You Can, a much more fun movie that deals with crime but also has great character growth. If you want to see that video and others like this one, consider hitting that subscribe button. Until then, thank you for listening, and I'll see you later.